Now, as we head towards the 2024 elections, we continue to delve into issues surrounding them. And today we ask, what should be expected from political parties as well as politicians before and on the election day? Good morning and welcome to Media and Society. I'm your host, Alicia Jali. Now, this is a show where we take a look at the intersection between the media as well as you, the society. Now, this show would not be complete without your valuable input, so do give us a ring on 011 714 0661, alternatively 714 0662, or X us using the hashtag SABC Media and Society. Now, in the run-up to elections, the political arena becomes a stage for various actors to promote their ideologies as well as perspectives on governance. However, amid the cacophony of voices, some rhetoric crosses the line into the realm of extremism, posing a significant threat to democratic principles. Veiled threats regarding the election process can sow division, seeds of discord, and potentially destabilize a nation. Thus, it is very imperative to implement safeguards to prevent such dangerous discourse from gaining traction. Now, the question we're asking is, how can we effectively counteract the transition from mere speech to divisive action within our society? Well, joining us to discuss, we are expecting Mr. Terry Tselane, who is the executive chairperson of the Institute of Election Management Services here in Africa. We have on Zoom Siyamthanda Capa, political reporter at News 24, Sithembiso Msomi, editor at Sunday Times, political analyst Ntsikelelo Breakfast, and Professor André Duvenhage, and researcher as professor at Northwest University. A very good morning to each and every one of you. Siyamthanda, I'm going to start with you. Thank you so much for joining us. Look, let's start here. How do the theatrics of political campaigning influence public perception on various ideologies?
Thank you so much, Alicia, for having me. And I think we've seen a little bit, and we've seen some of it happening already with the electioneering leading up to the election. I'll give you an example. There was a video going around of MK youth leader, I think Bongosi Kanyile, and that video was threatening the IEC if former President Jacob Zuma is not on the ballot. And I think that's a very good example of how that can spread. And it spreads like wildfire, but also it does in a way plant seeds within society as people consume that data. And I think going forward, it's going to be critical to put a stop to those things. It's going to be critical for every stakeholder involved to play their role. I think the media has an important role to play there.
Sithembiso, please weigh in there. What do you think? I mean, where do we draw the line between political rhetoric as well as divisive speech by those politicians?
I think, first of all, we need to accept that during election time, people range up a rhetoric, because it's a way of distinguishing one party from another, especially in a country like ours where most of the political parties are basically saying the same things. They are providing the same solutions for the problems that we have as a country. So some tend to try and use rhetoric to distinguish it in themselves from their opponents. So it's something that we need to accept that happens, that people will say things that sometimes sound outrageous. Some will even say things that are untrue just to try and win votes. I think all that has to be done within the rules, though. If everyone knows that we follow the rules, we follow the constitution, we follow the law, so you do not inflame you do not get people worked up in it to such an extent that they engage in violence. But to assume that South Africans don't see when the politicians are playing the game ahead of elections, I think would be ahistorical. Because if you look at what has happened in South Africa since the 1990s, there's always been hard talk, radical talk amongst politicians. But in the end, when you look at what happens in the country, we are mostly peaceful during elections.
Professor André, I mean, Sithembiso there says we must accept those outrageous rhetoric. Should we accept it just because it's election time and people are up and about campaigning for those votes?
Elisha, maybe I must start from a theoretical point of view. Politics is about the organization and mobilization of support. And when it comes to election time, this organization and mobilizing of support are reaching high levels. And it's also a very dangerous process because there's the potential for elite change. And clearly, people are going to play sometimes outside the rules of the game. And you mentioned the example of MK, and we have also seen in the past, in the build-up to elections, that people are not, and the leaders are not functioning within what I can refer to as a democratic ethos, a democratic set of norms. My take on it is the moment you enter a violent approach towards elections, and where you justify violence, you are running outside of the framework of a democratic ethos. And I think we have seen some of this in the build-up to the elections. This time, I am more concerned than was the case in previous elections, because I think this time there's a lot more at stake. We have seen some of the recent surveys done, amongst others by the Brenthurst Foundation, indicating that the ANC support may drop as low as 39%. There's the possibility that the ruling party may lose their absolute majority. So there are dangers at stake for the ruling elites, and it stay an open question how they will react to this. Hopefully, the IEC can manage it in such a way that we can deliver a free and fair election. I believe this is very critical for the maintenance and the institutionalization of our democratic dispensation.
Very interesting there, Prof. Ntsikelelo, please weigh in there. I mean, and maybe just share with us and our viewers maybe your most recent example of this very harmful rhetoric that has been coming from one of the politicians as we've started campaigning towards elections.
Yeah, I think there have been statements that have been made of late that are posing a threat to a democracy. On the other hand, I think sometimes, as South Africans, we tend to be too hard on ourselves because there is no democracy, in my opinion, that is perfect. Democracy by nature is work in progress. I mean, you can go anywhere in the world in the build-up to elections. There will be ups and downs because elections are about a contestation of power, and that tends to create a scope for emotions to be high. In as much as there have been unfortunate statements, but I don't think that we are going to have an election that is not free and fair. I mean, the most contested election that we have ever had, in my opinion, was the 1994 one. There were pockets of violence, but still it was declared free and fair. Maybe because, it was just after the democratization process or after the political transition to a democracy. But there have been a number of political reforms that have been brought in to consolidate our democracy. So I don't expect this upcoming election not to be free and fair unless something that is really way out of line happens. elections. I mean, the IEC throughout history has, conducted or facilitated elections which are free and fair. But there will be, unfortunate statements and, people coming across not to adhere to the rules of the game or a democratic culture.
Siyamthanda, I mean, should we accept this? I mean, I'm still on that point, because it's elections, emotions are highly charged. Every politician is trying to get in a word in order to try and put that message across that this is what we stand for. But should we accept that? And then in what ways do these veiled threats sometimes regarding elections then do pose a threat to stability of democratic institutions?
I'm going to start with the first question. I think now is a very important time for the people on the ground, and I mean the journalists on the ground, to know that they can challenge politicians. If someone is telling you that the ANC could capture this election, ask them why are you saying that, number one, considering that we've had 6 elections over 30 years, the IEC has showed that it's capable of doing this job and declaring free and fair elections. And then also just challenging them on those comments and calling them out. I think it's very important for us to call out politicians who are making such utterances and asking them if they understand that these are actually quite dangerous utterances they're making. And yeah, I think that's our biggest responsibility at the moment as journalists who speak to politicians, who have these platforms. And also I think it's very important for us when we write these kind of stories to also show South Africans. Unfortunately, South Africans can think for themselves. They are able to discern. It's important for us to also say that whilst this institution has done this party has done this has also happened. The IEC has shown that it is capable of delivering free and fair elections.
I mean, Sithembiso, maybe also just weigh in there. Siyamthanda is saying that, we need to hold these politicians accountable and also challenge these narratives as well as rhetoric.
Yes, I fully agree with her. This is the approach that I think a lot of journalists in the United States took, especially during the last elections, presidential elections in the United States, where they started saying, because there was so much false information coming through from politicians who are trying to win votes, they will immediately, in their reporting, then go and do fact checking and tell the readers or the viewers what the facts are on any issue. So I think it's an approach that we also need to take, because sometimes we run the risk of just running headlines without context, simply because they will give you what they call clickbaits. But in reality, we are not informing your readers about what is fully happening there. So, for instance, on this issue of whether the elections can be rigged or not, we should be able to say, even if someone is raising concerns, we should be saying this person is raising concern A, B, C, but the way the system works, this is how it works. So if it is rigged, they would have had to go through these particular hoops. So I think that is very important for us in journalism to provide that service to our democracy.
Absolutely. Prof, please weigh in there also, and maybe just also give us that thin line. Like, how do we strike, that fine balance of, reading into or buying into over sensationalism versus, the actual facts, like looking at the actual facts and educating the masses on what really the politics and the politicians have got to give the masses or the voters?
Alicia, yes, maybe we must give one step back and ask ourselves first the question, why are we in a way, or why are there interest groups and people concerned about the election? As some of the people mentioned here, and they are quite correct, we had relative free and fair elections since 1994. We are happy with the IEC. What is changing at the moment? And I would like to mention a few things. The one very important point is we are looking at a changing, a reconfiguration of the political spectrum, with certain political groupings losing support and new political groupings enter. So there's a bit of uncertainty on that level. Secondly, there are concerns about international connections. Recently, we had the DA writing a letter to the United States and others. There are the so-called connection between the MK party and Russia that was mentioned. There were concerns about who paid for the deficit of the ANC. There's high levels of violence in certain environments. So these are some of the concerns. Also, narrow margins when it comes to election results. And recently we have seen in some of the surveys that things are changing in terms of the support base of parties. In a nutshell, we enter an environment of change. When you enter a phase of change, it is conflict orientated. There is the potential of violence, and we have seen many incidents of violence in South Africa, not necessarily within the party political frame, but in the general political culture. And these are factors that are a bone of concern to people that want to see a free and fair election. And at the moment, I know about groupings. Defend Our Democracy is one of them, that are training people to act as watchdogs over elections, the practices, and so on. And I see this as the opportunity for us as citizens to ensure a free and fair election, but we need to take into consideration there are challenging circumstances on the outside.
Thank you for that, Prof. We're going to take a quick ad break, and after that, as promised, we're going to bring in Mr. Terry Tselane here on Media and Society. Remember, you can give us a call or alternatively engage with us on X using the hashtag Media and Society. We'll be back shortly after this. This is Media and Society now. Welcome back. We do have a caller on the line, Tselane, here in Johannesburg. Tselane, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for your participation this morning. What do you want to say about this rhetoric leading up to elections, Bab?
Good morning, Alicia, and to your viewers and the guests that are there. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Now, I want to talk about what Khanyile has said regarding the threatening the elections and things like that. I would like to point it out that, as one of the guests has said, elections are very emotional and people get to say things. But my point is simple. I want us to remember that the MK party, as we speak, they are winning all the contests or coming to second position, especially in KZN. And the way I look at it, these are people that want to vote. It's never been a sign to say they don't want to vote, they want to ban the country. But it was unfortunate, of course, Khanyile allowing the emotions to take over. But the point that started everything was when there was a threat that MK might not be in a ballot paper. Because of the followers of MK, they can view that as a threat, that we are being threatened here. Why, when we want to vote and then Zuma comes? Because of this party was registered in September last year. Zuma only came in 2016. As soon as Zuma came, and then there was all these things to say this party was registered illegal and all that. I think to allow peace to go on, why can't we just allow MK to vote? Because of all they want is to want to vote. Khanyile is saying if you don't put MK, then there might be violence. And that was the same thing that was said in July, that if you arrest Zuma, there might be violence. And people said, no, Zuma's got no supporters. What happened eventually, there was violence. So I'm thinking that for peace sake, why can't we allow MKA to be in a ballot to vote just like everybody else, and then there'll be no peace, there'll be no threat.
Tselane, thank you so much for that. Let me just first of all acknowledge Terry Tselane. He's with us in studio. A very good morning to Mr. Tselane. Look, we're talking about the dangers of, that is often adopted by political parties, especially politicians, as we head towards elections, and the rhetoric that could sometimes be potentially be divisive. So last week, I think you and I were having a conversation about misinformation and how politicians have ascended into using social media platforms to also get their views across. So what is your take on this? When does political rhetoric then become divisive and it could potentially be dangerous for society?
Well, firstly, let's start with the Constitution. Section 16 of the Constitution does prevent, or rather it advocates for free speech, but there are certain things that are not tolerated in terms of the Constitution. This relates to propagating for violence, or
like Tselane said, inciting violence. Yeah,
absolutely. So all those things are disallowed in terms of the Constitution. That is Section 16 of the Constitution. But not only that, all the political parties and candidates who submit their information to the Electoral Commission, like they've been doing with the submission of their lists, there is a form that they sign. This form basically binds them to the provisions of the Code of Conduct. So none of the political parties, none of the political leaders that are participating in the elections should actually be doing things that are disallowed in terms of the Code of Conduct. So the individuals who therefore sign, they are indicated that they will not actually be doing things that are outside the provisions of the Code of Conduct and prohibited conduct in terms of Section 87 of the Electoral Act. Yeah.
But we haven't seen anybody being held to account, Mr. Tselane, to be quite honest, in terms of how some of the things and utterances that they've actually put out there in society. So which bodies are then supposed to hold these politicians accountable as per, you've just said, the Constitution? Yeah,
so firstly, the incidents that are just pure criminal incidents. Obviously, those have got to be referred to the police, and the police have got to act once they've actually been able to get sufficient information about a particular incident. But those that are basically violation of the Code of Conduct, the Chief Electoral Officer can refer a matter to the Electoral Court, or any other person who is actually who is aggrieved by the decisions or rather by the acts of certain political parties.
So any member of society can actually report any of these politicians to these bodies?
To the Electoral Court. So the Electoral Court is the one that can impose penalties on either the leadership or a political party.
Very interesting indeed. I want to go back to my panelists on Zoom. Siyamthanda, I mean, let's talk about this. How do then the theatrics, right, of political campaigning influence the public perception of these various ideologies?
I think we can either look abroad or we can look locally at not even a political or an election situation. We can take it back to the unrest in 2021, and it started with voice notes. It started with people, unidentified faces, just calling on people to take arms and defend a certain person. But if it comes to the election, even a move to write to foreign nations asking for support and observer mission and education, it casts doubt on our own electoral bodies, and it just casts aspersion on the IEC and it brings into question the foundations of our democracy. And then people wonder if have past elections been rigged or have any foul play in any of our past elections. I think for me, it's the planting of seeds of doubt that are being dropped by political parties and and it builds onto something deeper by the time that you go to the top. And I think that's very dangerous.
Indeed. All right, we're going to go back to the lines. We do have Zeke from here in Randburg. Zeke, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Please go ahead with your comments, sir.
Thank you, Alicia. I wanted to ask your guest, Professor André Duvenhage of Potchefstroom University, or whatever it's called nowadays, the Northwest. He is a highly informed political watcher over many years, and he's well aware about election fraud that was committed in Potchefstroom in the Tlokwe election was the name for the place, which was really Potchefstroom. There was corruption in the election there, and I wanted to ask Professor Duvenhage whether the MK's threat, which is being defended so strongly, the threat of violence, whether this is less important, whether this is should be defended when the DA is attacked for wanting election observers. The DA is declared unpatriotic, a threat to South Africa when they're trying to get free and fair elections with observers that are independent. What does Professor Duvenhage say about that?
Our political watchdog there, Professor Duvenhage, they've given you a title. Please go ahead and answer.
Yes. Thank you, Alicia. I remember the incident very well. That was the time when the DA was in control of Tlokwe, Potchefstroom, currently JB Marks, and then there were a number of elections held. And the SABC at that time contact me and they show me how voters came from the Free State, from the Bothaville environment, and they voted in Potchefstroom. According to them, that was an arrangement between Supra Moamopelo and Ace Magashule at that time. So the outcome of that election was questionable, and nothing happened as an outcome. But people are concerned about the election there, and clearly there were elements of misconduct. There were also other examples of electoral misconduct that happened. Now, Mr. Tselane mentioned the Constitution, and he's quite right about the Constitution, Section 16. My concern, however, is about the implementation of the Constitution. And I am 100% in agreement with the person that phoned in that we need observers to watch the election. I don't think with a very small budget that the IEC can easily ensure free and fair elections and related practices and protocols in more than 23,000 voting points throughout South Africa. That is why it is so important to get observers to monitor this process, especially where the margins can be very small and where accuracy can be very, very critical. And I must re-emphasize it, and people refer to the violence of 2021, and this was a very serious political insurrection in South Africa. And if you look at the MK party, and you look at who is behind the MK party, you will find a lot of the leaders that were involved in the insurrection of 2021. And I am seeing both KZN and Gauteng provinces as the hotspots of potential for violence during the election. And just on another note, I think if we look at the EFF as a party, and I know there were a number of court cases about the slogan, kill the boer, kill the farmer, if that practice is acceptable, then the structures are basically condoning the use of violent utterances in the mobilization of support. And to me, this is fundamentally undemocratic. And we need a strong IEC, not only to quote the Constitution, but to act. And I would like to know from Mr. Tselane, what type of actions will be taken against, let's say, parties like the MK, like the EFF, and maybe others that will endorse violence or violent strategies. How will they penalize them, and how will this affect their election campaign? Can they be disqualified? And if they are disqualified, what will be the implications for the political process? I honestly am concerned about what may happen, especially in the provinces Gauteng and KZN.
Mr. Tselane, maybe answer there. He says the implementation of that constitution, which is basically what I was asking. We haven't seen any of these leaders or so-called politicians being held into account or being taken to court for their utterances that have been made public. So, I mean, I know you used to be with the IEC, but now you work for an independent body. So a professor wants to know, when is the constitution going to be implemented?
Yeah, so perhaps let me try to divide this into two, because there's a matter that was raised related to Tlokwe. Now, what happened in Tlokwe, because I was still part of the Electoral Commission at that time, was that there were people who had actually registered coming from outside the areas where the by-elections were taking place. Now, the Constitutional Court nullified the outcome of the results of that area, of Tlokwe, on the basis that firstly, there are people who probably did not reside in those areas where the by-elections were taking place, and that there were no addresses that would actually verify that indeed those people who participated were rather coming from those areas. And then we may recall that there was an issue about conventional addresses, and saying other areas do not have conventional addresses. But eventually that led to a situation where almost everybody who is in the voters roll now has got an address, whether it is description of where a person is staying, if they do not have the conventional addresses. So it was not necessarily a criminal, or the Constitutional Court did not find any criminal element in that particular aspect, but the results were nullified. It's an important aspect, because otherwise we start conflating issues that are related to incitement of violence with what actually happened at that stage. Now, the question that is being asked is what kind of mechanism can be put in place? I've already indicated that the chief electoral officer can take the matter to the electoral court, and the penalties that are there could include, or any other person could go to the electoral court. Penalties could include disqualifying a political party. It could lead to a fine of about 200,000. It could lead to candidates being prevented from participating in that particular election. So these are some of the measures that can be put in place by the electoral court. But in order for that to happen, a matter has got to be brought before the electoral court. You may recall that in the past, black is it BLF?
BLF, Black First, Land First.
Yeah. Were actually disqualified from participating in the election as a result of the positions that they were actually espousing. So it becomes important, therefore, for political parties to understand and to be circumspect about the things that they do and say towards the elections. But there are matters that can be referred to the police, and the police must act. And the Prof is correct that the implementation sometimes is a big problem. So taking the matter to the electoral court and taking the matter to the police, it's important for action to happen.
Thank you for that. We're going to ponder on that point a little bit more. I want to go back to the lines there. We do have Sithembiso from KZN. Sithembiso, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Go ahead, sir.
Alicia, thank you very much. I think I wanted to make one comment on the statement made by the youth leader of the MK party. I think the statement are so unfortunate, they're inflammatory, I think in his sober mind, he's supposed to withdraw them, because you can't say one party can hold all the other parties into ransom because one party is not appearing on the ballot papers. I think they must fight the cause for that, which is the IEC, not threatening the rest of other South Africans who doesn't know what's going on between the MK party and the IEC. I think this statement are more or less the same like the one that used to be made by the EFF leader, whereby he was taken into court and was told to apologize. It's just another threatening South Africans. So unfortunately, he's supposed to withdraw it in his sober mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sithembiso. Ntsikelelo, I want you to weigh in there. I mean, the issue of course, election observers, be it local, international or whatnot, is not a new thing. We've always had international observers. So I don't know why it's such a huge issue in this instance, but also weigh in on this issue of this incitement or perceived incitement of violence by a certain member of a certain political party. I don't think we've seen in the media any formal applications to actually report this individual to the actual IEC.
Well, first of all, I agree with the argument that one-party dominance is a thing of the past, and that the possibility that the ruling party might lose power is not far-fetched. But at the same time, I don't think that any political party is at fault by having relations with this country or that country. For instance, I don't think that the ANC or MK, they have, an arrangement that is unwanted by having relations with Russia or China. And I think what the DA did was out of line, because they have played the cart before the horse by calling for international observers. Because the question is, why do you pick and choose those countries that they have chosen? You go to the US, you go to France, you go to Germany. Why not go to Cuba? So I think we must be very careful of these politics. Seriously, as if now South Africa is not a sovereign state. Why not go to Ghana? Why not go to Kenya?
All right, thank you, Ntsikelelo. I'm going to go back to the lines. We do have Sazi once again from KZN. Sazi, a very good morning to you. Please go ahead with your contributions this morning.
No, thanks very much, my sister. Good morning, and to your panelists. Mine, I'm going to try to be very brief. I want the panelists to assist me on this one. My issue is on the constitutionality and the independence of the whole process of election. You have a situation where, if it was my liking, I would have said the judiciary as an arm of state being independent, because the executive, even in parliament, is more dominated by politics. So being the independence of the judiciary, why can't the constitution make them to process this thing of even announcing the date of the election? Because here you have the party, there is a president who even go and consult. Mind you, you still have IEC as a Chapter 9 institution. But you have a president who even go and consult premiers to declare the date. That means preparing the ruling party up to the date. Now, when the date is being declared, then everyone starts to make noise. Only ANC is not going to make noise because they had an advantage of some sort to even say when the election should be. So that means even the IEC of the ANC can even tell us when the election should be. Why is there not the judiciary being independent? That has to declare it. Now, that's why ANC won't complain. The bottom line is you have every party is complaining, or those who are complaining, because some of them, they even come from the ANC, they know what the shenanigans are. Right now, we're sitting with the situation of the leak of documentation on the IEC, which we say is intact. The IEC don't even come out to even tell the other parties that complain to say why such two members are in the IEC.
All right, start wrapping up, Sazi. Okay, all right, start wrapping up, Sazi. Yes. Sazi, are you still there? All right, I think we've lost Sazi, but I think we get the gist of what he's saying there. And I'm going to ask Sithembiso to weigh in on that, of course, on that view by Sithembiso. So we're going to take a very quick ad break, and of course, Media and Society will be back shortly after this. Stay tuned. This is Media and Society. Now, we are still discussing, of course, rhetoric as well as divisive speech by politicians or political parties as we build up to elections. I'm going to quickly take probably our final caller. We've got Maka on the line from Limpopo. Maka, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Please go ahead.
Morning, how are you?
We're very well, thank you, sir. How are you doing this morning?
I'm good, man. My comment is, I think we've got a problem with decisive leadership. Like the IEC has got a case before them regarding the registration of the MK party. They are dragging their feet. They are not ruling on that one. And they are creating a space for people like Kanyile to make this comment. I think they should rule on this matter and get it done and dusted with before the election. Because if they are dragging this matter, it's going to create a lot of uncertainty in the community. So I think IEC should be decisive on this matter. Should MK not be on the ballot paper? That thing should be decided now, not being waited until the last minute, because we're going to see something like a July unrest. If this thing is dragging for a while, it should be dealt with, and then we make peace with it.
All right, thank you so much, Maka in Limpopo. All right, so Sithembiso, I want you to weigh in on our previous caller's sentiments there, who was basically, questioning the process of elections as well as the constitutionality therein.
My view, although I'm not a constitutional lawyer, is that there is actually nothing wrong with the way it is done. It is constitutional, of course, and it has been happening like this since 1994. And the consultation with premiers, it's not the consultation with premiers of a political party. They are consulted as heads of governments, provincial governments. So if the Western Cape is run by the DA, the premier of the Western Cape will have the same information as the premier of Gauteng. When KwaZulu-Natal was run by the IFP, or the premiers came from the IFP, they were also consulted. So I don't think that there is a major issue around that. Also, if you look at how the system works, we basically know that every 5th year we have general elections in South Africa, and that they usually happen between April and August. So I think all the parties already know that the elections are not a surprise to anyone. So I disagree with Sazi there that it needs to be changed. I just wanted to raise one point, or different point. We have spent a lot of time here talking about political parties and the need for them to tone down rhetoric. But I think it's also important for society as a whole, and us as commentators, to also guard against fanning the fears, to guard against being merchants of fear by claiming that certain things are going to happen when we have no evidence that they will happen. Yes. So, for instance, in 2014, when the EFF came into being, there were those who were saying, because now there's a breakaway from the ANC, there's likely to be violence. There was no violence. Going back to 2009, the same thing had happened when COPE was established. There was no violence. So I can see that, okay, now there are people who have violent rhetorical statements that they are making, but there has been no evidence of that being translated into physical violence. So we must condemn those who make those statements without preparing South Africa to say there may be violence in some of the provinces in the country. Because our history does not attest to that. When it comes to elections.
Professor André, I'm going to ask you that, but I want Terry to quickly answer to our previous callers, because I think he has an answer for that. But Sithembiso is saying that as yourselves, political analysts, you must also stop inciting fear. So I'm going to get back to you with that point. Terry Tselane.
Yeah, let me deal first with this question of the election date. The election date is in the Constitution, in the sense that Section 149 of the Constitution says the elections must take place within 90 days after the date of the last elections. So you just look at the date of the elections that have taken place in the past, and then you know that the elections will be within them. And the issue of the consultation with the premiers, it's because, again, it is in the Constitution. The premiers can determine, in fact, they've got the powers to determine the dates of elections in their respective provinces.
Okay.
So when the president consults with the premiers, it's because it is cheaper if you have the elections in all the provinces taking place in one day. It is cheaper for political parties, it is cheaper for the society, it is cheaper even for the Electoral Commission. You know, so there is nothing sinister about consultation with the premiers. It is something that is supposed to be there. Now, the other issue that was mentioned is the issue of the observers. Observers are important.
True.
They've got to safeguard the integrity of the electoral processes. But this is different from the letter that purports to come from the DA, because that letter was basically defining the framework within which that observation have got to take place. Firstly, they wanted the Americans to come into the tabulation of the results and create a parallel system to that is developed by the Electoral Commission. Of course, that would be illegal to do so.
Absolutely.
You know, so it is not really people saying that we don't need observers. We need observers in these elections. There is an atmosphere of nervousness and anxiety, and in order to be able to deal with it, we always have the observers.
We always do.
Yeah, but if they want to increase, they can increase, but they've got to stick to the framework that is there. They go to the Electoral Commission. Electoral Commission accredits observers. You know, so it is not as though people are saying that we don't need observers. They're saying the route that the DA had actually taken is actually a departure from the normal practice of getting the observers to do the work that they're supposed to be doing, and then making sure that they stick to the framework that is there.
Professor André, I want you to weigh in there, and also on that point from Sithembiso, that political analysts must also stop fanning or inciting fear around, around issues related to elections, sir.
Yes, I agree with Terry in terms of the date question. I don't think there's problems there. When it comes to political analysts, my take on it is that you need to be as objective and as honest as possible. And yes, it is true in the current environment of our media, it is possible to create political waves. But, and maybe I differ there from some of the other viewpoints, we are living in a society that are extremely violent. If you just look at the number of political assassinations in KZN and some other places, that people are talking about the commercialization of violence and assassinations. And yes, it is also the job of academics to be critical, to identify problems, to do risk assessment. But you need to be objective, you need to be honest, and you need to play according to the rules.
All right. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much to each and every one of you for your time. Mr. Terry Tselane, Siyamthanda, the Sithembiso Msomi, Sunday Times, and of course, Ntsikelelo Breakfast, who's also a political analyst, as well as Professor André Duvenhage. Thank you so much, and thank you at home for watching our show, Media and Society. We hope that you do come and watch this show once again next week right here on the SABC News channel. I'm Alisha Ntantla Jali. Have yourself a great Sunday further. Goodbye.